We're live. So,
Okay.
welcome, guys. Welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you all know, is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is most logically consistent and factual. So today, I'm having a very interesting guest. That we're going to be having a wonderful conversation on losing the weight of racial identity. You know, just shedding the weight of racial identity and picking yourself over race, basically. And I am going to be having this conversation with Ogie Iyamo. Ogie Iyamo is, well, I would say he's a man who grew up in Africa and he now resides in the West, in Canada to be specific. And something happened when he got to the West. He realized suddenly that he was black. So I don't know if what happened that Ogie never knew he was black all the while he was in Africa. So I wanted us to just have a conversation around what does it mean to be black, what does it mean to be racialized in one continent as compared to living in another continent. So, okay, before we start, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, so that we can kick this off nice and smoothly. So, welcome to Critical African Thinkers.
Thank you very much for having me, Charles. It's definitely been a great opportunity to be joining you in your space, and I'm obviously actually hoping that during the course of this conversation, we would have very very beneficial dialogue. So once again, thanks for offering me the invitation to come on. So to introduce myself, my name is Oge Yamu. By profession, I am a social worker, a gerontological social worker. So I work with seniors. I think seniors are awesome. I think they are our connoisseurs of knowledge. So I like talking to seniors or elderly people. In terms of my interests, I love historical reading. I read a lot of historical literature. Um, just a voracious a voracious reader. In terms of also my other interest, I'm a big Arsenal fan. I love watching. I love watching. I love watching football. Well, in North America, they call it soccer, and I am, pretty much a man on a journey of self-discovery. I try to improve myself every day and also improve others. And currently, I am working on a learning module, which I think Charles and I will go over to help people understand or explore some of the inconsistencies I've found with having a racial identity. So that's it on my end.
Wow. As you're just speaking, I could just say, well, we have a lot of similarities in our experiences because you and I both, from our conversations offline before we got here, we got to understand that you and I grew up in basically the same city, and so we've
Yes.
had almost the same influences and all that. And you said you love historical reading, and that has been one of my passions. I love reading history. I love reading about people's. I just pick up history books. I read about Asia. I read about North America. I read about just. I love anything that has to do with people. Anything that has to do with history. And then
Yeah.
you also said you're an Arsenal fan. Um, Now, even though I'm not a big football fan, I would say I'm an Arsenal fan. But Arsenal, they're very, very consistent in losing. That's one thing you can count on them for. When Arsenal loses, it's normal. But when they win a game, that's something. They break the expectations. So it doesn't really bother me so much because I'm not so vested in football, except when it gets to my country playing. That's when I really get emotional. Like when Tunisia kicked us off from the AFCON that's going on right now, I was really,
Yeah.
really angry and I felt bitter about it. But other football, I just want goals. I don't care who's scoring, but as long as the balls are entering the net, I'm good to go.
You're good to go.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm good to go. So I can say that in that sense, we've had very, very similar experiences. But
Yes.
today's conversation is going to be centered around the conversation about race. So now, even though most of what you're going to say are things that I already know or possibly already believe or understand, just for the sake of the audience, I would like to ask. You grew up in Africa, so you spent most of your time in Africa.
Yeah.
What was your conception about race while growing up in Africa? What did it mean to be black? I mean, when you heard the word black as it pertains to using it on a human being, white and all that, what came to your mind? What was the conception around race growing up in Africa?
Hmm. Thanks, Charles. That's a very, very good question. Um, so it's a two-part answer for me. There's a short answer, and there's a longer, slightly more nuanced answer, which pretty much also still goes back to the short answer. So, but the short answer is I had no conception of race in when I was living in Nigeria. The reason I say that is to put things in its proper context. Race is within North American European ontology, I guess. It's more of a system of human categorization based on perceived biological differences. So for me, as a person living in Nigeria, that modality of categorizing human beings did not seem apparent to me, especially from just more from a Nigerian context. And in saying that, my identity was primarily based on, my ethnic background. My dad's Benin, my mom's Yoruba. I knew I was a Nigerian national. I knew that was obviously my country of residence. I knew there were other people around me that were of other different nations. I know in Nigeria, for instance, in Lagos, for instance, I don't know, in Ilukweju, like we have a
Yeah,
strong Indian community,
Indian. Yeah,
right? Yeah. So living in Nigeria, I just had this understanding that, people were different ethnically and people were different nationally, but that didn't amount for me to um, um,
it
a
didn't translate into
conception.
race.
Yes, it didn't translate into race. Absolutely. Absolutely. It definitely didn't translate into race. And to be even more specific, to be more specific on even the notion of race as it applies in North America, it's normally constructed around this identity of blackness. So black is not necessarily a generic word as applies to race. It's basically saying because you're this phenotype, you belong to this group of people that we see as belonging to the same biological race. If you get what I'm saying, it's primarily constructed around this someone's phenotype. Okay, and so in if the nuanced answer to that is when I was in Nigeria, did I see myself as a black man? That's also not true. I never saw myself as black. I just because, and the reason why that was impractical for me to even make sense of in any tangible way is the population of Nigeria, over 200 million people. I think last time I checked, Lagos census, I think it's like is it 14 million or 19 in Lagos?
In Lagos, you get anywhere from that 14 to 21 million.
Okay,
The statistics are not
yeah, there you go.
all that. Yeah.
So I'd always understood that, you know, even though from an objective standpoint, I saw myself as dark, it just, I always knew that, there were other people who were Nigerians who had diverse hues. So it wasn't something that I would say had any meaning in, to me in Nigeria, I was just Ogie, and that pretty much was it. So in Nigeria, I didn't even have the perception or conception of myself as a black man. So that's the answer to
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So now, for context, for people to really get what Ogie is saying, is that it's not as if it's because we're all of the same race in Africa. That's why it didn't even occur to you that there are other races. You get, because definitely we knew that there are people from Asia and they look different from us. We knew that there are people from Europe and they look different from us and look different from the people in Asia. But we did not see it in the terms of, okay, this is a yellow man, this is a white man, this is a black man. We all saw it like, okay, this is a person from this part of the world. This is an Indian, this is a Lebanese, this is a European, this is an American. You understand? If two Americans were to come to Nigeria, one black, one white, even you yourself, if you were to come to Nigeria, you might be called an Americana, you might be called an Oyibo. You understand? So the word black was much more of a descriptive. It was used in the descriptive sense of, okay, this is identifiably okay of this hue of color. Not that it had anything other than that. So it's not as if we did not know that there were other people, but we just did not conceptualize it in that sense. You get, yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know of this comedian. His name is Trevor Noah.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, good.
Yeah.
So there was one comedy routine he did where he said that he always wanted to go to America because he always wanted to be black, and he is of mixed German and African ancestry. So in
Yeah.
South Africa, even with South Africa, with all the racial appetite and all that, he wasn't even considered as black.
Yeah.
But the moment he stepped into America, he was certifiably black. You understand?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's, you see that it's crazy that it seems as if, like Dr. Mason would say, that racism creates race. You understand?
Yeah.
I am very, very sure that prior to the Western conception of race, people just saw themselves as, oh, the black people they were seen as Ethiopians. For example, in
Yeah.
the Bible, there's somewhere that states that, can an Ethiopian change his skin? You understand? Black people were just simply seen as Ethiopians or people
Yeah.
from Sudan, or what you get that. But in this world currently, the Western conception of race has sort of spread to other parts of the world, where it's
Yeah.
not necessary for people to classify themselves based on something as arbitrary as the color of their skin. And in America, particularly,
Yeah.
race doesn't even make sense in America. The reason, if for example, if you and I were talking in
Yeah.
relation to someone from Europe, someone from Asia, we
Mhm.
could say, okay, there's race. But in America, how do you define someone's race when someone has mixed European and African ancestry, and probably has some Native American ancestry? But just because there's some strand of black there, this person
Yeah.
is an African American, his race is black. Doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. You understand? And
Yeah.
the white person has to be, has to be pure white, has to be pure European for him to be white. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. It's, I mean, and that is actually part of the inconsistencies that I also observed, and try to make sense of by actually seeking those answers that help me make sense of the inconsistencies. And what you're basically highlighting is, you see, the whole notion of race, especially as pertains to people of African descent, was primarily to steal people's labor, right? But to do that, the English bourgeoisie, the elites, they kind of had to, in an abnormal way, hold human biology in flux. They had to, because you're looking at, it was more of like a population control to exploit labor. So it was very economic, and that's the reason why, if you look at, like, like federal documents, that try to account or group populations around race, you see that it's very 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 arbitrary, very very, very problematic, because it tends to try to hold human populations, and with migration patterns and stuff like that, human beings have always interacted, but it tries to hold, like, it tries to hold that in a place of staticity, just to hold it in flux, so that population can be controlled, and how do I put it, people's labor could be stolen in terms of the historic rationale behind it, and that's how you account for the arbitrariness. So, for instance, there's this document. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Federal Directive 15. As a matter of fact, it's one of those documents that I always kind of pull up haphazardly to people to look. So in that document, it tries to classify people along racial lines, right? So it has whites, and it says things to the effect of white are all, people indigenous to Europe, like, okay. Then no, sorry, it says white, and then it says the countries or the continents where these people have indigeneity to. Now, one of the interesting parts in terms of that document is that it lists North Africa
Africa.
as as a as the continent or geographical location of white people. But the interesting thing is that if you pull up a map of North Africa, you find something that's pretty blatantly obvious. You find that Sudan is actually a country within that geographical area. So, by that meaning, they're basically trying to say Sudanese people are white people. So you start to just basically see the inconsistencies in this type of construct.
Yeah, and you know, when we, you know, when I first started talking with Dr. Mason on a theory of racelessness, even though race had little to do with my everyday experience
Yeah.
in theory, even in practice and all that, but you know, I'm still sort of westernized in the sense that I interact a lot with the Western world, that I have sort of picked up those racial, what have you,
Yeah.
epithets and all that. So I can actually see, okay, this race, this race, I could relate to it on that level, even from Nigeria. Um, Now, one thing we talked about, I think it was when I was grilling out, I was saying, you know what, but if you were to take the sample of someone's DNA, you could trace where they are, where they came from in a particular geographical area in the world. But even as I was asking her that question, I was already forming an argument against my own argument, because I was telling myself, guy, look, do you know that migration patterns have changed? Maybe what you are the geographical equation you are pinpointing to is maybe within the last 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 years. You understand? Who's to say that there weren't other people who were in that location before your people came in? So
Fair
it's
enough.
not as if the race is tied specifically to one geographical location that they can't move. So when 23 and Me tells you that your racial composition, you're 70% from somewhere in Nigeria, in West Africa, who's to say that your ancestors did not come from somewhere else? Who's to say that your ancestors have always been there? You
Yeah.
understand?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if we were to believe what biology tells us, that we're all of the same stock, and we
Yeah.
diverged, we traveled out of Africa, it means ultimately we're all Africans because we originated from one place. It means the Europeans are Africans as well. So that conception of race, when we know that the only reason why these phenotypical characteristics evolved in the first place was just as an adaptation to our environment. For
Yeah.
example, our darker skin somewhat helps us, in to protect us from the rays of the sun in Africa, which is a tropical region. So the sun is much more higher here.
Yeah.
You yourself, when you were in Africa, I'm sure you were a shade darker than you are
Darker. Yeah.
currently.
Yeah.
Now that
Absolutely.
you're in Canada,
Canada,
in the western
where
part of
there's
the
no
world.
sun. Yes.
You get.
Yeah. Fair point. That's
So
that's.
so so all these things, it doesn't make any sense. The classification of race, at least to me, at least to way I've gotten to understand it. But my question now to you is, when you first got to Canada, when you first got to the West, how did you how did the racial element, how did it impact you? You understand?
Hmm.
What was the conception of race in the Western world, and how did you relate to it? Did it seem foreign to you? Did it seem disconcerting to you? Did it make you feel out of place? Or how were you able to plug yourself racially into an environment that was so kind of immersed in race and racial language?
Um, that's another good question. And to be very honest and transparent, I think, um, obviously, as you know, when you move to a new place, there's always a period of acculturation. But what I found to be the most immediate, for me, impact of this racial identity, which at that point in time I really didn't know. It was just more was more this, how do I put it? Was more the notion of me being identified as black, right? Because and now that I, taking time to study and reflect, it makes sense because the truth of the matter is, with within the North American context, Canada, U.S., society is primarily society populations are primarily stratified on racial lines. So that's the modus operandi, if you're supposed to use that word. Um, so that was my first. I was like, why is there so much fixation on my skin color? You know, but psychologically, I still had that. How do I put it? That I would say that Nigerian grind. I still had that sense of, I'm here. I'm here to school. I have to get good grades. I have to get a job. Whatever you guys can deal with this abstractions, your business. I really don't care for it. So even though I realized that people were beginning to perceive me more around my skin color, and by that I mean, Charles, to put things in proper perspective, like when I was living in Nigeria, it would people would normally ask questions more around the lines of, and correct me if I'm wrong, people normally ask more question along the lines of, who are you, or where are you from, right? And in a sense, those questions are questions that connote personhood. You know what I mean? That we just want to know, because they're trying to fit you within a geographical area or whatever. But with my when I came to Canada, it was more this essentialist probe on, like, kind of like, what are you? Which, like I said, for me, because I was I was new, I really didn't care for it. I just wanted to get good grades. I just wanted to, get a job, and kind of move on with my life. So I wouldn't necessarily say I had any encounter that I would deem um, racist or racial. I know there were a couple of there were some inappropriate comments. I remember there was a day I was at a pub. So I went downstairs to use the washroom, and they had this. It was more of like a water fountain. It's a step you had to step on to wash your hands. So I did wash my hands, and all of a sudden behind me, I heard there was a European guy and an Indian guy. They were just standing behind, and the European guy goes, "Oh, look, even the black guy knows how to use it." So it to me it was like, whatever, and I just walked out. Right. So those were kind of more um the most impactful one was just more the imposition of the label black. But others were just more inappropriate comments. I didn't really think much of that, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, so it was more a benign. There wasn't, even though people were fixating on your race, your skin color, there wasn't anything. There wasn't anything sinister about their fixation. Is that what you're saying? Was it just more a benign? This is how things are here. This is how it operates. This is how the environment operates. You have to sort of identify with the racial group. You understand that this is the culture within the Western environment. You understand, but how sad is that people will pick your your race as the primary identifier in terms of wanting to relate with you as the most important thing. You understand, when interacting with another individual in the West, that people would see your race, your skin color is is so important. You understand? Like you, when you were there, you were like, I'm here to get my, and at times it might make Nigerians seem like we're insensitive, like we're not perceptive to what is going on around us, because we are so pinpoint focused on,
Yeah,
I came here to do this thing. Oh, nothing is going to distract me. You
yeah.
get, you wanted to comment on that, so go ahead.
Yes, yes. I wanted to say, looking back, you see, I would term it as, um, you see, there's a certain level of obviously ignorance that comes out of the fact that people here, and a lot of people I don't know this, are not. Um, it's kind of more in indoctrinative education. Like the West, they're not. I mean, it's it's this modality of thinking that centers the whole existence of the world within, for instance, Canada. Like you think the world revolves around you, so everything is basically, as a consequence of where you're at, and then everyone external from that either don't they don't know anything, or they kind of have this, for the most part, a single way of understanding a singular way of understanding the world. So I would blame it to a certain degree more on the quality of education. And you kind of see it come out. Like, for instance, someone would say, for instance, I am going to Africa. And, you'd have to ask the person, where exactly are you
Where
going?
where in Africa? Africa is not one place. Africa
Yeah,
is a
it's
whole
not one.
continent. And a lot of Europeans make that mistake. They like, it's like, see if Africa is one country. Uh, but no,
Yeah,
Africa is as diverse. I think you haven't even have more genetic diversity in Africa, cultural diversity in Africa, than you have in Europe or in some other
yeah,
parts of the world.
yeah, yeah, precisely. So, I mean, these things, they come out, and you just notice that it's more of a system of education for the rank and file of Canadians, and how they, you know, I guess see other people from other nations. But most of the time, those kind of things are overcome once that interpersonal relationship is established, and you're kind of able to educate people more on the kind of false assumptions that they have, which comes as a function of their education and socialization.
Yeah, and you see something about I know someone has made this joke before, that America is sort of, and maybe by extension the West is sort of the hot chick who is so hot that she doesn't have to develop a personality, in the sense that, you know because of the influence of the Western world in major parts of the globe, it's as if they don't take time to even learn of other parts of the world, and
Yeah,
they see the world through that European framework. You understand? So everything has to sort of align or make sense in regards to the European way of thinking. You understand?
yeah,
And any other thing is sort of, well, maybe this is an exception, maybe this is a deviation. So we are in a unique position because we understand ourselves,
yeah,
and we also understand what is going on in other parts of the world. For
yeah,
example, we can get news about what's happening in the West, and when you see the news of the news of Africa in the Western media, you'll be like, "Well, is this the same Africa that I'm living in that these guys are showing?" You understand? So
yeah.
there is that disconnect there. So there is really that alignment is not really there. So let's get to the meat of the module that I really wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
So in our conversation in Discord, you said you were working on a module that will help people to sort of put themselves above race. George asked the question, which we're going to touch on later. George, just hold on a bit. We'll touch on this question later. So now, the just tell me about that module. What, as it pertains to what you're doing, in terms of how to help people to sort of de-emphasize race or their racial identity. Am I summarizing it well? So you should be able to do it better. So let's go from there.
Okay. The background of my decision to create a module was primarily based on what I felt was, I guess, gaps and inconsistencies that I social inconsistencies that I noticed that I feel led to more conflictory based assumptions. And so, for instance, um, there was an example. I was in class, and we had an indigenous elder come in, and the indigenous elder, just more as a practice of familiarity and just to properly situate things, did an activity where the indigenous elder would ask um, the members of the class, like kind of where they're from. Now, prior to that, I had been kind of getting, obviously, um, getting more acculturated into the process of racialization. But that exercise kind of was one of the first things that started to snap me out of it. So the indigenous elder went around asking people, "Where are you from?" And I found, the people, the individuals, my cohorts that I would have prior to then just randomly identified as white, started saying things like, they're third generation Irish, Scottish, Ukrainian, and they're sitting down, and I'm like, well, if you know your lineage and ancestry, why am I calling you white? And that was when things really started to get in gear for me in terms of, there are objective modalities of analyzing the world that doesn't really lead you into conflation street. So for instance, if you look at a map, right, you have objective um, um, names of countries, places, continents, and people fit within that objective construct. I have two passports, for instance, so I'm Nigerian Canadian, okay, but you don't find white or black on the map, right? So you now I now started to think to be like, okay, if there's something objective I can work with, how much of an attention and energy should I be paying to working with abstractions that tells me nothing about the person? And so that road, that sorry, analysis basically left me going to the path of understanding this construct within its historic linguistic perspective. So that's primarily black and white, because for me it seems it's people who are of African ancestry and people of European ancestry that engage in this what I would call assimilation, where it just it detracts you from reality. So I started working on ideas around this module to have um, actual conversations, actual objective conversations, and historical analysis with individuals that would be engaging with this module, just so we can all um, get to a place of understanding who a human being is, not the what, who people are. So that's kind of like the background for my module.
Mm. As you were just speaking, some light bulbs are going off in my head. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. If there is something much more objective that you could identify or classify people by, that is even much more substantive then why are we going for something as superficial as white or black? Now, this ties neatly to the question that the answer to this question that George put here. So, George, how different is it at defining oneself by tribe or by race or by which team sport you support for that matter? Okay, so what I think he's getting at here is if in Africa you still identify yourself by your tribe, that is one method of identification. How different is it if someone in the West identifies themselves by their race? Now, your tribe tells you something about you culturally. It tells you much more than just your skin color. It,
Yeah.
it might be a doorway to what your proclivities are,
Mhm.
what you are as a person. For example, the Yorubas, you know, the Yorubas are very respectful. You understand, to their elders, they bow and all that. We from the other parts of it, for example, I'm from Delta State. In Yoruba land, we are seen as being very rude, and because we don't do all those prostrating,
That's stuff.
you get. If a Yoruba man wants to greet his elder, he will lie flat on the floor.
Yeah.
But from my part of the country, I'm going to look you in the eye. I'm going to shake your hand like
Yeah.
an equal. You understand? So when you say black, what does it mean? How it doesn't tell you anything about me. But when you said I'm an honorable man, it tells you something that okay, this
Yeah.
person might behave in this way. This
Yeah.
might be his peculiarities. You understand? So
Mhm.
that's the sense in which race is different from identifying you by your tribe or by your ethnicity.
Yeah.
This also ties to what Melinda said, that Melinda says that, okay, African Americans don't actually see other Africans as black because we cannot relate to their history, which is very good and fine, you understand, because the histories are different. We did not have that history of slavery. So why are you classifying us a lump sum with African Americans, which will now cause some sort of tension in saying that okay, you're black. Why are you not understanding our struggle? We might not be understanding the struggle because we didn't go through it. We didn't have that history. So classifying us all as black doesn't even tell us anything. You understand? It doesn't even prefer any solution to any problems. So I can see African Americans as say as an ethnicity, as a tribe. You understand,
Mm.
within the American context, and they're a tribe with their own unique history. They're a tribe with their own unique story. You understand that people can relate to. People of that tribe can relate to. You get, but lumping them together with other blacks or other people from Africa as just blacks, there is a disconnect there. Same also with the white people. There are certain peculiarities with being Irish. There are certain peculiarities with having a German root. There, for example, the Germans, they are into brewery or something in many parts of the world. There are even professions that you find in America that are tied to the particular ethnicities. You see Italians dominating one sort of kind of work. You see Germans dominating one sort of kind of work. But when you say white, what does it tell you about that person? But when you said, okay, I'm German, I'm of German ancestry, I'm of Italian ancestry, it narrows it down to something much more tangible, something that you can put your hands to.
Yeah. And that's a good point, Charles. And you see, one thing, or one major inconsistency that, yeah, because I've always believed that, to understand race, it's imperative that you understand it from an individual perspective. Um, a lot of institutions, like the American Anthropological Association, they've come out, they've written, like strong comments against, either gathering race-based data or even the notion of race. So the science pretty much debunks, I don't like using the word, or disproves this idea of race. But I think, and this is, one of the reasons why I really, really appreciate the book by Karen and Barbara Fields, Racecraft, because to me, it centers the understanding of race within what you do as a person, right? And that I think has been one of the things to make the most profound impact on my life, because I'd ask myself the question, how am I participating in a racial or race-based society? Like how am I as an individual doing that? So to put it in proper context, you see, black as a word denotes, okay, black as a word is a color, okay, but when used on human beings, it is constructed to connote an idea, an illusion of homogeneity, right? In other words, you're all the same. You're all the same because how we think you look, your experiences are the same, your outlooks are the same. Everything about, and see, and that's the reason why it's constructed to this category. So your financial outcomes are the same. Your education is the same. It doesn't see you as individuals with individual experiences and stuff like that. So for me, I personally, in understanding what I understand, um, the illusion of homogeneity is actually what causes a lot of these conflations, right? Because race constrains you to this illusion of group identity. So that's one aspect of it. So even if you look at the American population, for instance, by America, sorry, I'll say, I mean, United States population, for instance, there are citizens of United States that don't identify as black. There are citizens of United States that don't identify as African American. Which further shows the blendedness of the population. But one objective thing that I cannot or anyone cannot argue against is that these are people that belong to the geographical political entity called the United States, the United States citizens. So for me, that's kind of how I simplify stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. I agree. I think the point you're making is incredibly, you know, we have to we have to look at things from a way that would be much more constructive, much more tangible if we're going to prefer solutions. Take something like affirmative action, for example. I think with the way it's set up, I think it's doing a great disservice to, say, African Americans, because I think that the intention was, okay, how do we help people who are historically were facing legalized oppression? But just by the mere fact that I have the same skin tone as an African American, if I come to America, I may be it become a beneficiary of maybe affirmative action programs. You get, but why should I? I don't have that history. You understand? So it's but if it was much more geared towards, okay, you know, we're looking at it specifically for this people,
Yeah,
not just on the color of the skin. That's why it's easy to say that all white people are privileged when we know that white people, in terms of their economic status, there is a spectrum. There are those who are dead poor, and there are those who are up there at the top. Same with the same thing with black people, the same thing with African Americans. There are those who are struggling financially, there are those who are also up there, you understand? So but if you want to use that idea of just based on the skin color, then they have to share these characteristics. They have to share these situations, these economic situations. It's not going to be substantive in terms of creating solutions. It's too nebulous. It's too wide. It's
yeah,
too. You have to bring it down a notch a bit.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and that's for me is the reason why I mean, going on the journey that I've been on and I still am on. One of the key things that I used to help me is just more intentionality of language. Like I, where like when someone comes and says, "Oh, a black person," I always ask, "What do you mean?" Like who exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about a Ghanaian? Are you talking about a Senegalese? Are you talking about a Fijian? Like, specificity of language. And, by so doing, I think what is missing is, you see, human beings are fundamentally not crayon colors. You can't use an abstract concept or an abstract construct to try to understand pigeonhole human beings, right? Like an ever evolving social organism. And so, this idea of a monolith, it fundamentally causes issues because you're now not looking at resolving human uh, inequities from a human standpoint. What we tend to do is we tend to create this inclusion exclusion category. So for instance, if you look at, if you say for instance there's something that quote unquote racialized black people will benefit from, that group becomes an that group becomes an inclusion slash exclusion group, because now for you to participate you have to fit into that box. Whereas you could take a more broader humanistic perspective. So I'll give an example. So in terms of service delivery, for instance, if say someone moved to Canada and English is their second language, oh sorry, maybe they don't speak English, or English could be or they're not as proficient in English, sorry, and they're trying to access um, um, public services, right? And they're having it difficult, communicating, or accessing those services because English is a barrier. A way to solve that would be to bring in translation services, right? It's just that simple. Then, when you're working within the modality of abstractions, you can now start saying, oh well, maybe the reason why that barrier is there is because of the person's race, other. So it takes you on a different course, right? Of not being able to remedy something that seems pretty much commonsensical.
Yeah, and one way in which I think race just messes things up is, take for example, you have two racialized people of different racialized groups, and
Yeah.
then there is a negative interaction between both of them. In the Western world, to me, what I see is that a whole lot of a lot of the time, racism is usually fingered as the cause of that tension, even without digging deep to find out why has this person interacted in this way with this other person. You understand? Why is our first order imperative to think that it's because of racism? It could just be so many other things. You understand? But once you've brought out the charge of racism there, where do you go forward from there? How do you solve that problem? One person is racist. You understand?
Yeah.
But if you took race out of the conversation, if you took race out of that, then you could be able to see what really is beneath all that. Because there are two things that can happen. If someone is truly racist and you say they are racist, well, it doesn't matter to them anyway. You understand? And if they're
Yeah.
not racist and you say they are racist, you have accused them of something that's it's a very thorny issue. And it might create more barriers than solutions. You understand? But if we understand that we're humans and that people can disagree, this is not in any way saying that racism does not exist. This is not in any way saying that racism is a thing of the past. I think that as long as you have human beings, people are going to still discriminate based on something as arbitrary as the skin color. You understand? Whether
Yeah.
you want to accept it or not, people are still going to do that. But I have the philosophy of um, putting race at the backside. You understand? Let us x-ray every other factors, and if we've not been able to come up with any other explanation barring the fact that this person has a different skin tone to you, then I can now comfortably say, okay, so this person is being racist. Why this person is acting towards this other person is primarily because of the skin tone.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you see such issues are they're very, difficult to in terms of meaning and strategy to convey to, the everyday person about how such a much of a distraction in terms of actually solving and remedying things that could be. So if we're to dial it back a bit, just you think about it for a second. Race. basically has no biological basis. So it doesn't exist. Okay. So what we're now basically working with is an individual or a group's ability to discriminate based on a premise that doesn't exist. So in doing that, you start to see how it almost seems like there's this huge potential for you to gaslight yourself if you're not really understanding how slippery these things are when you start to. So a good example would be, imagine if my Euro Canadian boss comes to give me criticism. you know I don't know her intentions. I just know that she may be challenging me on something that she perceives to be an issue, right? I can take that and say, okay, she's giving me feedback. I may not like the way she said it, or I may not like the way he said it, but it's obviously something I can work with. Now, if I find that there seems to be a weird inconsistency in terms of how maybe she's approached, or maybe she's used incendiary language, something inflammatory, then an actual way for me to remedy that is at least to try to go into my organizational policy, right? So by doing that, I'm actually trying to access substantial, subjective, um, I guess, apparatus of de-escalation, or um, apparatus that helps me seek tangible remedies before I can even consider um, going into this area where I know I have to present a lot of proof to substantiate that the reason behind um, um, her behavior has something to do with my phenotype. So this is the kind of things that are conflation, or and it is an example of a kind of conflation that we see people make. And I feel the reason why it happens is because we've we're limited in our ability to really understand race, and also by doing that we also conflate it a lot with either class or ethnicity, right? So it's just a really slippery slope. And for me, I would always say, I kind of feel like, race is it's more a modal it's more it's a modality that is kind of more like, it's like a belief system. It's almost like religion in a way. So put it to you this way, Charles. If I said to you, for instance, that God told me to, I don't know.
There's this grating noise coming from
Oh,
somewhere.
sorry. Oh my God, that's annoying. Oh. She's clearing up
She's
snow.
making dinner or
Sorry,
something.
sorry. Uh, 1 second here. She probably doesn't know she's doing that. Oh. Sorry about this. If I, for instance, said, that God told me to slap myself, I don't know, or pour water on myself. Well, I've made a comment, that you can. Uh, Charles, do you mind if I just, because I can I?
Okay, no problem. So let me just open it up so that some other persons can call in. You can go
Sure,
attend to.
sure,
Yeah.
cool. 1 second.
So Chloe Colin, let me put the link in the description in the chat. But anyone else that wants to call in. Yeah, Chloe is here already. She's here.
Okay.
She's here. Hi Chloe, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Just a lazy Sunday.
Lazy Sunday. Well, you look really bright for a lazy Sunday.
Oh, I think it's the light because it's
Right.
just light.
Sorry about
But
that. Yeah.
hey, Ogie,
Hi, Chloe.
I'm good. Hey. Yeah, I was just waiting till you finish your story, but then I guess like it's shoveling snow, right?
Yes.
I was like, yeah. I lived in Alaska, and so like I know what that sounds like because they have like you're like in the lower floor and then the
Yeah.
windows up there and then you just hear it. Yeah, I lived in one of those bedrooms when I lived in Anchorage. Yeah.
So you guys are relating an experience that I cannot relate to, right? It's all right.
Yeah. What is snow?
All right. Okay. So go ahead. Continue. Finish up.
Oh
What
yeah,
you're
sorry. I
saying.
was just saying, like, it kind of operates more as a system of beliefs, right? Like if I were to say, "Oh, Charles, God told me to give you $1 million," right? I mean, you're not you're you will take. I mean, if someone told me God told them to give me $1 million, I'll take the $1 million, even though I would be like, "Are you?" Because I can't substantiate that was exactly what happened. But I guess I have to take them on their beliefs, right? So I find, and maybe that's actually a poor example, but I think race or I think racism it operates more as this modality of belief that you would have to look for things, objective things outside that to substantiate. If you know what I mean. So that's I guess pretty much why for me it's more about looking at those things in front of me to say, okay, how can I remedy this situation, right? So sorry.
Yeah. So Chloe, jump into the conversation.
So yeah, that definitely does remind me of a work situation that I had at one point in which that was very much so when I was in that kind of racial ideology in which I was in a very sticky place in my job. So I went from one working group where I fit in really well, and then suddenly I was moved into a different working group, and I couldn't really substantiate why suddenly I just couldn't get anywhere. And so, but I was still like in with that modality of, oh, it must be because of my race. And so I was only looking for those things. But what it caused me to do was to actually completely ignore even the other experiences of other people who are alienated from the same group. So there was like one, now thinking back, right? And I think this is ultimately going through this experience has made me better, in like made my professional life better because it makes me more diligent and actually understanding what the actual issue is. Because, before, someone would say something is like, well, it has to be because I'm Black. It has to be because I'm Black. Right. But I completely ignored that there's like this other straight white guy who's also being, completely ostracized from the group. And I completely ignored those things. And because what it came down to is that it was just a clique of guys. It was a clique. And they would anything would cause them to ostracize someone else. Oh, this guy's a jock. We don't like this guy. Or this. There was one instance in which a girl, she came into the one of the guys in the group. He temporarily allowed her in because he was interested in her. But one day she came in with an engagement ring. He didn't know that she was dating somebody, and that obviously now she was engaged. Yeah. Suddenly she's shut out of the group. So it's not only because she's a woman, but it's because she's inadvertently rejected a guy and she didn't even know she rejected him. Like she just thought she was coming in. And, but then there was one other girl who was completely accepted in because one guy viewed her as a little sister. So there's so many different ways in which people discriminate and choose, like you're one of us, you're not one of us. And, being able to see like, okay, the actual real issue is not because of, they're discriminatory against XYZ identities. It's because they are so insular in terms of their friend clique group that they will just automatically reject everybody unless you had an extraordinary, level of, oh, you're one of us, like the same interests, same personality type, all of these things. And so there are more ways of levels of discrimination that can happen that intersect and overlap, that by just saying it's racism completely ignores how complicated humans are.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for sharing, Chloe. That's pretty much it. It's I guess I just find the language of race to be very it's so restrictive because it doesn't really allow for a holistic exploration of what's impacting that individual. I mean, it's also this notion of, and whenever I've engaged people in this, in this conversation, there's there's almost this accusation put forward, like, oh, you don't, are you trying to deny racism? And which is like, well, I live in a racialized society. There's nothing to deny, but people just having that added layer of, okay, fine, how do we explore these issues in a constructive way, right? How do we put the person at the center of understanding, what is that which really affects them, and how do we remedy for it?
Yeah, I would say, like, yeah, you have to put it in its place, right? You have to put it accurately in this place with other factors, instead of saying this one thing is the greatest thing that's affecting everything, because that's a straw man argument that can easily be debunked. And then people who cling to that straw man say, like, oh, you're denying all these racism. It's like, no, I'm putting it in its place in the context with the rest of the world of how it works. That's not denying anything. It's acknowledging reality.
Yeah, Steve is arranging his library. He wants to tell us that he reads a lot of books. I think I have to pack my books and just gum them to this wall so that people know I read books. Welcome, Steve. How are you doing? No, we like the books. Steve, recenter, let's see your books. Please take it back to the books. No, we're not going to move forward if you don't take it back to the books. Let's see your books.
You want to see the books? All right.
Yeah, I want to see it.
There you go.
Good,
there you
good.
go.
This is the view I know. This is the view I like. All right, so jump right in, Steve.
Well, the hardest thing for me has been really coming to terms with the fact that other people see me more as white than I do. That's been a really, I don't know how better to put it than a radical and traumatic experience that has been for me, because I never gave a shit. I really didn't. I never cared what color I was, what color you were. Like, I always thought about it from this aspect of, like, yeah, I get that bad things happened to ancestors, but they're not happening to you. But that's not entirely true, is it?
Yeah.
But now my feelings on that haven't changed, but my feelings have deepened in their meaning and understanding of how the world works, history, ideologies. And so there's a lot more there to unpack and to carry with me.
Yeah.
But also understanding that race is a biological fallacy. It does not exist in nature aside from a gene turning on and off. That's it. That's the only thing it is. And then on top of that, now I'm forced to actually talk about race in a way that I was never used to. Has been interesting to say the least, but I've been kind of going just like balls to the wall, heads deep into it. And thankfully I've got, all of you guys that are just absolutely amazing human beings that helped me along the way, including Dr. Sheena Mason, who's been way more patient than she needs to be. Coach Love has been helping me with a few other things, and something that I've came to the conclusion of lately, because she showed me something or told me something about what happened to her. And I'm just like, that's crazy. That wouldn't happen here. Like seriously, it does not happen in Utah. The thing that she was describing to me.
Yeah.
Like we'd be out with blood and like out with pitchforks, asking for blood if that ever happened here in Utah. And I know that for a fact. 'Cause I've lived here almost all my life. I have, racialized Black friends here, and it's never happened. They've had perceptions of things that have been racialized, but nothing like what she described to me has happened here on a large scale, right? And it got me thinking, not only is culture not racial, meaning cultures can change depending upon environment and location. So racialized Black folk might have a culture over here that is completely and separately different than over here. No different than exampling Nigerian culture, and their way of viewing race is very much different than an American's or someone from the UK. So not only can you not hold on to grasp anything to understand it long enough, but then somebody says that it happens, and then you're like, but it doesn't happen over here. So like, what's the common denominator in all of these things? What happens to be, I think, places where the culture and ideology of race has a deeper history that is motivated by discrimination. Which makes it even harder to understand. And so it's just this really long journey of and process of trying to understand all of these different things. But in the end, really, I mean, do you not prick me? Do I not bleed?
Yeah.
We're all the same human beings with very, very consistent and different, a consistency in the difference of experiences that we have. But that doesn't mean that I can't empathize with something that you're going through. It doesn't mean that I can't struggle with you as a friend, as a compatriot. You know what I mean? And so to assume that people who look like me can't imagine how a cross burning would feel or a racial slur would feel is a ridiculous statement. It's a ridiculous argument, because that it would preclude me from ever having anyone do anything racist against me, and that's just simply not true. I've had racist things done against me, like specifically racist things, not like, oh, you're white so you don't have to deal with that. No, it's been very clearly racial animosity. So to me, it's losing the weight of racial ideology, I guess you would say, is I think it's paramount to being able to step forward and move forward in good faith to try and make the world a better place, a more inclusive place. Like, this is actually how true inclusivity happens, is when we look at other people and we like, yes, I want to learn about that. I want to embrace that with you, because people don't own cultures, right? Cultures are a collective item that can't be owned, because they're never the same and they're always changing. So yeah, that's what I gotta say. I could probably go on for a couple more minutes, but that you get the basic gist of it.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Before Ogie responds, Cody is here. Cody, let's hear you.
Hey, Cody.
Hello. I want to join and talk from Ogie's comments.
Can't hear you very well,
Can't
Cody.
hear you.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Cody.
Let me see if I can adjust something on my end. Audio default. Any difference?
Your audio is still bad. Can you?
Yeah, your audio is still really bad, Cody.
We'll give you a chance to speak later. So just work on it. So, okay, you want to respond to what Steve and Chloe has said?
Yes. And thanks, Steve and Chloe for sharing.
Oh, by the way, it's really wonderful to meet you, Ogie. Really wonderful to meet you. I've been watching your conversations. I don't chime in all the time, but I've been watching you, and I really love the way that you talk. So,
thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I feel like at the, one of the things that I, as a Nigerian come into Canada was shocked by and even because I've spent some time in the States, in Houston, is you would think for a country or countries that are so um, yes, there is the historical the historical side of things, but country or countries that have been in existence for so long and are used to having a diverse population, you would think that such um, I guess issues would be easily resolvable just based on diversity being just this ever-present constant. And for it to almost seem to be this I guess this issue that I guess seems to be unsolvable is in part the reason why I, for one, decided to be like, okay, well, what can I do as a person? What can I do based on my understanding? Because I know for a fact that my attitude, my thought process, it contributes towards keeping this um, construction in place. So how do I remedy it from a personal standpoint? And one of the ways I've chosen to remedy it is just more to pay attention to my language and my actions, because for me, primarily, I have to center the conversation in 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 the person's in sorry in highlighting the person's personhood, right? And that for me has been very, very critical. I try my best. I think I do a pretty decent job to avoid race-based descriptions of people. I normally go specifically towards continental or national designation, because for me, and I know Dr. Mason, and I think I also saw on the the uh, what's this? I think it's Office of Management and Budget, in terms of like racial categorization, that African American actually is a racial designation. However, for me, the reason why I still prefer using the term African American is because, to me, African American still connotes a sense of heterogeneity. It still means I'm working with diverse groups who are still culturally diverse. Like you said, Steve, like the culture within the northern part of the U.S. is different from the culture within the southern part of the U.S. Right? So for me, it's placing attention to that intentionality of language. And interestingly enough, I have found that, aside from, and that was part of the reason why I really tried to attach myself to Dr. Sheena Mason, is in my journey, I've actually only found maybe two people who actually are employing that strategy in terms of your education and interaction practices. The first person is a professor. His name is I know I have one of his books, Dr. Piamenta Bay, Jose Bay, who's always about, what, you have to address people as proper persons. People belong to different cultures, nationalities, so that has to be a constant. And the second person is Camille Foster. I really appreciate Camille so much for that. Just more the fact that, one, he was basically able to deracialize himself and say, well, I'm not black. I don't use that designation on myself too. And then Dr. Sheena Mason. So I think the solution in terms of being able to have, holistic dialogues, I would always say, is we have to come in our proper persons. Like, we have to come as human beings to the table. So I don't know if I shared this in the group. I don't know if it was Steve or Cody that commented when I said, I don't know. It was Doctor Zolati.
Dr. Mason. Okay, Dr. Last Scotty.
Scotty.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
yeah. When I said, and it's just no offense. I don't, when people come to me as, white or black, I find that difficult to kind of to open up, because to me it seems like you're coming as your political identity, and it's hard for me to connect on a human level, even though I can empathize. But it's just more this, um, um, I guess, this safeguard that I have of, okay, because if you come in your proper person, then we can build on values. We can build on like, really getting to know each other on a human level. But once we start adding in, you know racial abstractions into the mix, I'm like, okay, I don't really know what I have going on here. So that's, but thanks, Chloe and Steve, for sharing.
But you do know that some people will see that and they will see it as divisiveness. They will see that you are trying to remove yourself from the struggles of Black people. How would you
Yeah,
respond to that?
you know what,
You're
Charles?
you're, you're basically a sellout. You are you're not helping the cause. Why
Um,
would you do something like that? Okay.
you know, what you see, the ad the that's a good question. It's actually something I experienced recently. Um, what I say to that is this: people matter of factly are not homogeneous. You see, it's this conferment of homogeneity that actually plays into the illusion. People are heterogeneous. We have to be comfortable in sitting within that lens of understanding that people are different, right? People have, and like you rightfully said, Charles, that even two siblings are different. You know, I come from a family of 9 siblings, and we're all different. We're all very different from each other. So what I normally say to that is, you see, people for the most part have to congregate based on shared values, and that's the reason why, for me, I've never really understood this notion of lumping myself in a political formation that has no clear coherent values, and also a political formation that seems like I have to be in for life, right? I understand joining either political formations just, for a time sensitive strategy, and then dispersing after. But the short answer to that is, I think the divisiveness is more with this mandatory obligation or expectations to tie people into a group that may or may not reflect the individual's long-term value or long-term goals. But because you feel there's a similarity of somatic features, then there is that there's that expectation placed on them, right? So that's basically what I think. I
Yeah.
think that's also a poor that's also a poor argument, anyways. But
No, no, no. It makes sense. I like the way you were able to articulate the fact that for you to even align with anything, there should be some sort of value to it, some substantive value, something that transcends just something as superficial as the skin color. Understand? And I think it's something that many people don't see these days. You just want to balkanize along something that is so ephemeral. Yet there is no real value to it. There is no grit. There's no foundation to it. You get, for example, political parties in Nigeria that just basically they can cross carpet at any time because there are no ideologies. There is no there's no value that centers this person to say, okay, when I'm in this political party, this is what we stand for.
yeah,
Or when I'm in this other political party, this is what we stand for. The basis for them joining any political party is access to power. and which one of them offers me the easier access to power. So the man that was saying the other party is a demon yesterday, if that party is going to give him access to power tomorrow, he's going to switch sides so easily. There is no value there. It's just, what I can get. It's the same thing with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, sorry, Charles. Can I make a quick addition to that before I even forget? And I was actually planning to illustrate this by I don't know if you've heard of this concept like circle of safety or circle of security.
No, I haven't.
So circle of security is a theory that basically tries to say that, especially for children, that there is, especially from a family systems perspective, like your parents, your uncles, your aunties, and cousins, they all form your circle of security or your circle of safety as a child, and that anybody pretty much outside your circle of safety might form a potential risk. But the idea is just more, who are those people around you that pretty much keep you safe. Now, when I was growing up in Nigeria, and as you know, Nigeria is, we believe that it raises a child. But there's an added part to that analogy, which is it is the village that a parent gives consent to that raises the child. So, for instance, when I was growing up, my circle of security or circle of safety was my mom, my dad, my cousins, my brothers, and the neighbors. So those are people who would, if I was acting out, they would say, "Okay, what are you doing?" But anyone outside that circle of safety, to me and to my parents, were strangers, regardless of phenotype. That I don't really care how you look. I don't know you, so you're a stranger to me. Now, transposing that understanding, right? Because we build relationships based on trust. Now, coming to a racialized society where you are almost where phenotypical features become the excuse or the premise for you to build your circle of safety. So people are basically saying, because you're black, we all, will keep you safe. But the problem with that is these are, for the most part, people you don't organically know. You don't know what your intent is. You don't know. You're just put in you a group because you believe, all black, we're all, in this together. So it creates a false sense of security that a lot of times you find that when you start to question or go against the grain, you realize all of a sudden that you're in this political construction where there is a standard way of thinking, right? A standard way of behavior. But because you've not been able to, ask the necessary questions to even figure out if that's something you even fit in or if that's a value you share, right? You now become this problem. So what I say to that is, typically when people who believe because they share the same somatic features as you expect you to think in a certain way, expect you to act in a certain way that fits their own ideas or ideologies of how you should be in any particular situation, that becomes problematic.
Yeah. I have, that really hits home with me because, like I said before, I was raised in Alaska, in which it has, I think, around less than 3% Black population. And of course, my mom, I would always notice that anytime my mom saw another Black person, she would do the nod, right? And I personally never got that. But because she was raised in like, she was born in the 1950s in Louisiana, and so that was a very real thing for her. That her neighborhood, that was something that was tangible, that she felt safer in a Black neighborhood than, with, at the political time, like, white boys were dangerous. My mom to this day has a fear of white boys because back then they could do horrible things, but I obviously don't have that experience, and I don't have that necessity just to feel safe. Like, this person knows me, I'm safe around this person, because for me, like, actually I was kicked out of the Black table, honestly, because they thought my dad was white. And so they're like, well, your dad's white, right? And I'm like, no, I don't know. But I didn't fit in with them. I just didn't fit in with them, like my interests, my musical interests, my humor, whatever. And then I'm glad that they did that, because it forced me to sit with people and actually figure out how to find commonalities with people. I actually know, like, oh, you're into this. I don't rely on this one phenotype to say we must be alike, and then be dissatisfied. I guess this is the best my relationships can be, because I'm only basing it off of this one factor. And but I think it was one thing that even my mom couldn't really understand, why I just didn't automatically go with the Black. Why weren't we like best friends? And it's like, well, I don't really, like, we don't have anything in common. We just don't. And it's just like the differences in generations, from a time period where they kind of did need that, but it's like, I think they have a hard time understanding younger generations, where why don't they automatically do the head nods, and why don't they all automatically coalesce with each other? Because we live with the reality of, we know we're not all the same, and we actually have to manually figure out if who we jive with.
Yeah. Vanara, Cody, so jump right in. I'm sure your mic is better now.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can hear you loud and clear.
All right, I switched from my laptop to my phone. Don't know why my laptop wasn't working, but yeah, I wanted to branch off of what Ogie was saying, and that I want to know, did you look at the Venn diagrams that I made and posted in the Discord?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Okay, that interested me when you said that you were making a module, so I'd really like to work with you on that, because as I try to explain with those, often, see, the way that people construct definitions of race, they're often polythetic, meaning having many but not all qualities in common. Like with diseases, people will checkmark symptoms in order to diagnose somebody, but you don't need all the symptoms. And how I try to explain those Venn diagrams, I showed how different things can be used to diagnose people into different races, and that can be based on morphological phenotype, ancestry, cultural background, belief systems, etc. And the main issue that I see with concepts of race is that people automatically conflate morphological phenotype with behavior patterns or belief systems. And so often people get upset when they meet individuals who they racialize in a certain way, but who do not subscribe to those belief systems or behavior patterns. And I find there are parallels between that and neurotype, which, for those not understanding neurodiversity, I'm autistic, and so I have a differently formed brain than other people, and that makes me naturally prone to different behavior patterns than others. And it seems to me that a lot of racial beliefs have automatically assumed that people categorized into different races are automatically of different neurotypes. And I think that that's a fundamental stereotype that we need to overcome.
Can I just say that it's really great to hear Cody's voice on here?
Yeah, this is the first time I've heard his voice. I wanted to
really?
say that. Yes.
It's always good to hear people like engaging, or see people engaging on the Discord, and then having them gain the courage to come on here and talk, put themselves out there. I love it, and I love Cody's perspectives on a lot of things. So I'm really glad to see them here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Cody. I would definitely be reaching out on your Venn diagram. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I just wanted to go into more about how you explained that using overly simplified terminology like black and white helps perpetuate stereotypes because I also have talked on the Discord about the linguistic concept of synecdoche, which is cases of where you refer to a part of something but mean the whole, or refer to the whole of something and mean a part. And that's often used in racial terminology. And that often then leads to, that ties into the fallacy of composition, which is a logical fallacy where if you assume something is true about a part of something, then it must be true of all of it. And I think that's why a lot of the language used to discuss race and racial identities help perpetuate stereotypes and the assumption of there being homogeneity amongst individuals who are racialized in a certain way.
Yeah.
I'm so glad Cody thought of that or said that, because I've been saying that this whole time, like forever. I've been saying this is a compositional problem. I'm so glad that Cody said that.
Yep, I just had to look up the precise language in order to articulate my meaning.
It's also a really good movie. There's a movie called I think the only time I've heard it pronounced is in the movie, and I guess they said Schenectady, which made it sound like a town, which that's what it kind of eventually became. It's actually a pretty good movie too. Not really,
I've never heard of it.
But it's
yeah, definitely, Cody. I mean, I definitely agree with that part. That it's definitely an issue of you said synecdoche.
Synecdoche, Synecdoche.
Okay, I would sing synecdoche, definitely.
Right, part is used for a whole, and a whole is used for a part, or something like that.
But I mean, if you think about it, that's really how it's supposed to function. It's like when you get into your car and you hit the start button, the car is going to start. And that's the reason why, for me, using, homogeneous terms has always been problematic, because I understand what it's intended to convey, which is basically sameness. There's no, I often find, Euro Canadians who were, well-intentioned getting into that, running into that issue. So Euro Canadians who, either want to be supportive, they want to be quote unquote, white allies. And I'm like, how do you parse the fact that you're, part of this homogeneous group called the white race, but then you want to be a white ally? That for me offers some form of contradiction, at least on the base level, because you really have to understand that you're tying yourself to this group, and it's a group with very, very broad definitions. Like you can't singularize your way out of it, especially when you're just basically working on that homogeneous construction. So thanks Cody for sharing that. That's definitely insightful.
Thank you, and I agree.
And another thing with that, especially if people are calling themselves white allies, from the perspective of their definition, like say they consider themselves white allies, people who do that also have the idea of the definition of being white is in opposition to other colors. And so inherently they are like, it's a contradiction in itself. They're calling themselves part of a race that inherently opposes others, but yet they're going to be an ally. And they're bound to struggle with themselves and then project that struggle onto other people as a result. Because when I interacted with people who strongly, heavily identified as white allies, in order to somehow support me as a woman of color, they projected onto me oppressions and struggles that I actually never dealt with. And they actually kind of put more on me and try to fix something that actually I never dealt with than just not doing anything at all. Because when I wrote for this one, core for a little bit, I happened to see at least in a public forum saying Chloe deals with sexism, racism every single day in her messages and comments, and I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I don't. Like, I don't. Like every single time, like I try to conduct myself in a way where I have very pleasant conversations and people react to me, irregardless of their political background. That's something I take pride in. But yet they could not see, they actually never paid attention to, like, actually what my reality was. They just projected that onto me, and they were advocating for changes to moderation and website using me as an example, when they're like, that's not, I'm not evidence at all for that, but it was real in their mind.
Yeah.
So, if I can pop in here really quick, something else to kind of go along with what both Ogie and Venera, Cody, are going with here is, if you look at the history of specifically, black and racialized black and white relations, you can also make the assumption that it's an ergo hoc propter hoc fallacy, where the problem is we assume that because X happened, Y happened, right? We assume that white people caused slavery, but that's kind of the sleight of hand, isn't it? No, it's racism created the tool, which is race, and that is what propagated slavery, right? So it's kind of like this Mott and Bailey, where we're kind of giving you like two choices, but we're kind of hiding the other one a little bit. The problem has always been the idea of race. It's always been that, because before that, it wasn't a problem of race. It was a problem of something else. It was either location or ideology, faith, religion, any number of things. But to assume that one must follow the other simply because it's easy to look at is a it can be dangerous and misleading.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with you there, Steve. And that's the reason why, for me, it's always, I mean, the study of history for me has brought me so much perspective. And that's why for me, sometimes it may appear to others that I act very neutrally, but for me, it's just more the, it's just me, I guess, trying not to complicate or even oversimplify issues, right? Because if you're even looking, for me, if you're even looking at the history of, the transatlantic slavery, I kind of feel like any understanding that doesn't really focus on the economic impetus of it, you're just, now you're going to end up in Conflation Boulevard, because it was such, I mean, it's the human, I don't want to say even the human condition. Like, you read the history of slavery, you see these warring nations, and that's the Portuguese, Dutch, the Spanish, and of course the English. And you see, the policies towards each other, and how they were basically trying to one up each other economically and politically. And it just, turns out that, Africans got caught up in the mix, and, that for me is more the reason why, I try to be very, I just try not to conflate things. I understand the historicity. I understand it was a very ugly experience. But at the end of the day, it's more about, okay, what can we do now? Like, how can we function? Like, how can we function properly in a society that will continue to be diverse? And also, how do we? And I think Dr. Sheena, she talks about it. I like the fact that she harps on, people sometimes conflating race with class. You can't overlook the class element. It's impractical to overlook.
Yeah, poor boys are as good as whites. As in rich boys are as good as rich people are as good as black. The one that Joe Biden said, I can't get that quote.
Yeah, it's like how do you even miss that? The English in 1619, and I tell this to a lot of people, and they find it incredible. It's like, if the English could actually, if they could actually have succeeded with enslaving their own population, they would have done it. As a matter of fact, they started off with themselves first. So when we talk about race, to me, it's like, well, that's the distraction. What you should be focusing on more is the class that had it in your interest to actually put this modality of human categorization in place. So I find that I don't know if it's being overlooked intentionally, but that's definitely something that has basically bolstered my understanding. Is basically asking myself, what's the class angle to this?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and that's my same experience when I actually look at the history, because like seeing what they were like, in like the conditions in England, right? It's like the sanitary conditions and why the upper class, just said it's okay for the amount of squalor and the amount of death and disease. It's like, well, these people are genetically just less than because we're upper class, right? And it's like, it's the same thing. It's a pattern that repeats. And the thing is, as a society, what I see is like, as a society in general, as they become, they build up upon their economic success and technology, the quality of life kind of raises up, and you can't really subjugate, those people in the way that you could before. And so then you have to move to the next group that maybe you can subjugate. So like, especially in the United States, after they did it to their own, they tried to do it to the Native Americans, right? But the thing is, Native Americans easily could escape because they knew the lay of the land. So like, okay, we can't do it to those people anymore. So they had to find another group that they can that was easier to manipulate, and just take someone from a completely different continent. They have nowhere to go. They don't know the language, and economically it's just easier. And then also you have a whole system on that continent that is providing you those people, because it's not like Europeans went over there with nets. They didn't do that themselves. And in Africa, they had their own justification why it was okay to do that. And I see that that's what people just do in general.
Hey, Chloe.
It's convenience. Yeah.
Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Yes, I love that book. Yeah, and
that played a big role in that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And but then also in the conflation with class, again, I would bring up my mom a lot, because the biggest exposure to a lot of these things that I realized this doesn't really make sense is honestly my mom. And she was talking about something in which, at one point there was, where she lives, there was a homeless person that approached their car for money or whatever, right? And so she figured, well, the reason why they approached us, the Black family, is because they know what it's like. They know that we know what it's like to be without. My parents are technically like pretty well off. Like, my mother has always had land in her family. My father has all of my vast majority of people on his side of the family are like engineers. So like, she herself was conflating herself like, well, we're Black, we're associated with poverty. But I don't, even historically, our families, just looking at our particular family histories, we've never really been in poverty. We've always had the ability to provide for ourselves. Like my grandfather, yes, he was working since he was a kid, but we've always had some type of land. We've always had some type of skill. Like my father grew up raising chickens and cows and stuff like that. And I don't call somebody who has access to the means to produce and support themselves as someone who's in poverty. But still, my mom has the conception of, well, we know what it's like to be without because we're Black. But it's like, no, we've always had some type of means, whether through our skill or education, or we've always had some type of resources, just particularly looking at our family. So I don't think it's fair for us to make the assumption that we do understand what it's like, to project ourselves into that poverty narrative and say we know, we have some firsthand experience in that, because I've never been in poverty. So it would be completely unfair for me to even insinuate that ever.
Yeah, that reminds me of the anthropological concept of the generalized other, in which Generalized other anthropology or sociology is basically your general picture of different individuals or strangers and what you expect of them. And the issue with racial identity is that it leads you to generalize or expect different things from other people. And that's also tied into the self-fulfilling prophecy, which people often then internalize the stereotypes projected onto them. And I think that sounds a lot like what happened to your mom.
Oh yeah, big time.
Man, Cody and I are just on the same level here because I was about ready to mention that. But there's also something that I was going to mention, which is kind of this concept of what do you do with someone when they are attached to their racial identity too, because there's something that I do not like militant atheists about. Being an atheist myself, I don't like militant atheists because they go out and they try and force you in some way to disregard your faith, right? I don't want to do that. And I don't want to do that to people who have a racialized view of themselves. I want to help them. I want to build some kind of a golden bridge between me and them. So when they begin to investigate something and they have questions, I'm here. I can answer a question if I can. But it begs the question, what do we do when the equipment breaks? That equipment being those structures that maintain our view of ourselves in a racial way, right? There's this guy named Ryan Jenks, and he runs a YouTube channel called How Not To. So it's How Not, and then the number 2. And what he does is he tries to reduce the fear of rock climbing because a lot of people are afraid of the equipment, right? So he goes through these videos and he breaks the equipment to show you what it actually takes to break the equipment so that you can feel safer getting up there and climbing, because he wants people to climb, right? So what happens when we break the equipment that we are using to reinforce, racial ideologies, not so that we can be more comfortable in them, but so that we can break them and move on to climbing the mountain? You know what I mean? Like, how do we get comfortable living outside of that construct that has either been built by us or built by others that forces us to stay in the same place and never outgrow the space in our mind and our soul, that really kind of deserves to be kind of set free in the sense that race is very I view race as a very restricting idea, right? I don't want to be racialized as anything because I am so much more complex than that. I have different beliefs, I have different ideas, and I want to share those ideas. I want to be able to talk to other people with those ideas, and to assume that some other race doesn't have those same ideas or an opinion on that is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I guess that's the elephant in the room, right? It's and I think that's in part the reason why I have, kind of decided to create this module, because sometimes as someone who's been in the school learning environment, I kind of feel like sometimes academia has a way of overcomplicating simple stuff, right? So just creating an
America to that too. America has a way of complicating simple things.
But that's why I like Dr. Mason's theory of racelessness. It's not overcomplicated. It's not conflated. There's a lot of information that you have to process and a lot of things that you have to think about, but it's not like we're doing like collegiate level mathematics and physics and stuff like that to try and figure out numbers. No, it's very plain. It's very simple. And she literally gives you the information and it's like, see,
Yeah.
this is it. And everybody's like, no. It's ridiculous. Like, listen to Dr. Mason, for crying out loud.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. Like when I started to go on this journey, and historical journey, and obviously with reading historical like documents, books, and stuff like that, I kind of already even from a layman's perspective, already knew what the issue is. But then I started to see that the consent or the scholarly consensus around me were were kind of dancing around the issue, and they were doing this thing that I would call like trying to make retroactive or timeless, this racial identity, like conferring it way back into space and time, So I that was kind of one of the shocks I had when while I was doing my study, and to find someone like Dr. Mason and also Dr. Pimenta Bay to be like, no, 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 no. You have to focus on the timelines here. This thing doesn't go way back. And even sometimes what I try to bring to people's a consciousness is, even when you look at the words black and white, because I understand that our understanding of these words are specifically as relates to, so black relating to someone who's darker, and white relating to someone who's like the color of snow, and having to tell people that these words are also time specific. The word black doesn't go beyond the 5th century. It comes out of a specific culture, out of a specific people that had nothing to do with Africans. It had absolutely nothing. It was just a word that came out of their own particular ontology, and I guess your way of understanding your own society. And these words in the primary sense were used to convey abstract ideas. Like, I tell people, like, etymologically, black means to be pale. And people say, oh, how the hell, how does it mean to be pale? We're like, wait, hold on a minute. The guys that created that used these words were Anglo-Saxons. And part of it was more in relations to, when someone's sick or deathly, they become pale. And so to describe that experience, they would use the word black. So, like, these things have to be understood within context. And you don't have to take them beyond the time that they actually came into existence. So when you, for instance, say, when people, for instance, say black civilizations, I'm like, no, they were just civilizations. They named themselves, they lived their lives, and that's it. So when we start conferring these identities to be things that were just, and it's also actually something I do while I read. Like when I see the words like black, white, it's kind of like a mental reprogramming that I do, because I start to ask myself, okay, fine, what time is this person talking about, and are they just using modern language to convey these ideas, so I don't get into the simulation. Mm-hmm. But to directly answer your question, Steve, I think a lot of it has to do with us just creating these partnerships, because at the end of the day, what I feel is central to, I don't know, there will be people who I would say function properly with their racial identities. They have the ability not to, they're black, but they don't make it overcomplicated. They just, and so I think in a sense that's fine. But I think for most people, it's important for us to really, really slow down, slow down the noise, and really, really contextualize these things. Like, we know the history. We know that, slavery happened and it was a bad thing. We understand that a critical function of slavery was primarily to take the person out of humanity and make them property. Like, we know that. We also know that, there were laws that actually supported that practice, right? So for me, the idea is, what do we really do with what we know? Like how do we support, individuals who, for the most part, see these inconsistencies? It doesn't make sense. Like, the number of people that I've spoken with about this, and they'll be like, yeah, I've thought about that. Like, well, then what are you doing? Are you just, you know, it's pretty staggering. But I feel like, with obviously Dr. Sheena Mason's theory of racistness, I think we'll have a breakthrough, to just, help individuals focus on what does it really mean to be a person, and what does it really mean to be a human being outside, these abstractions and these social labels.
All right. We have had a very fruitful, in fact, this has been one of the most interesting conversations we've had on this channel. And I don't know if I should feel dumber or I should be grateful that I'm getting so much more information and I'm feeling smarter because, having to talk with Ogie and, the way you guys are just conceptualizing these things, you're making it, just laying out the arguments. It's just so brilliant that I could just sit back and listen and not just say anything. And it's good. It's good to have these very, very fruitful conversations. So I think we should wrap up the next few minutes, next 5 minutes. I don't know if I think I think that we did leave out some parts in terms of how the module is supposed to be executed. The module that Ogie is talking about, how it's supposed to be executed in practice, you understand? So maybe you just run through that in a few minutes, then we'll be done for the stream for today. Yeah.
In terms of the execution of the module, I am actually looking to, because I think I'm looking to stagger it to actually create 2 or 3 modules at most. But I want to use the first module just more as an introductory module to get people familiarized with, simplifying these terms. So we will be looking at, things like timeline, especially as concerns, I'd say specifically language. And by language, I mean specifically the words black and white. And just, trying to get a baseline for people to actually really understand what these things historically meant within the context of Western Europe or England, right? So to just more to create that familiarity and also to create an understanding that color words are not. I mean, you could use them, but once again, it's going to be conflation boulevard. You're going to end up there. You're not the proper way to describe people. And then the second module I'm planning to create is just more looking at race, just more within the lens of its economic, historical underpinning. So I plan to finish with the first module of this February, sometime by the end of March, and it would involve, audiovisual components, and obviously, I am hoping maybe Dr. Sheena can help me just more from a theoretical perspective, because I actually really want the module to really be situated within the theory of racelessness, because I think it falls perfectly in line, and I'm fine with using that as a theoretical base. So I will be leaving my email, Charles, with you for people, because I kind of want to test run the module with a select group. So I'll leave my email with you. Feel free to share with your subscribers that can come on, and we'll just give a little bit of an expose on the module when it's completed, and then you can basically go from there.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Would appreciate that. So we'll run with that. It's good. So Vanara, you go just final thoughts. Steve, then Chloe, then Ogie. Then we're done for today.
Yeah. See, I want to say I agree with everything Ogie said, and see what he mentioned before too about people projecting concepts of race onto past generations is something that really upsets me too. Like whenever I hear people say, "Oh, black people sold their own to slavery," no, they didn't. They saw themselves as Ashanti or Aruba or people of the Sokoto Caliphate, and they captured and sold other people outside of their social group into slavery. They had no concept of group black identity that only came about in America later on. And let's see. That reminded me of some other videos that I had shared on the other Discord that I just reshared into Dr. Sheena's about concepts of racial or cultural identity or parallels to it that existed during the times of the Roman Empire, as well as the etymology of the word nation and how that's become conflated with and associated with the concept of race as well. So I look forward to future conversations.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah, thank you, Cody. Thank you
Cody.
very, very much.
Yep. And maybe you can check my pronunciation. Osuanorin Orimi.
Good work, Cody. Good work. Remy. So thank you, my friend. Right?
Yep.
Ah, man, good
So,
work.
so you took the pains to learn some Yoruba, so Yoruba words. That's cool.
Oh, wow,
But you have to go learn the Edo one because his father is Edo and Nigerians are patrilineal. So even though his mother is Yoruba, he would align more with his father's side. But that was a good one. That was a good effort.
Thank you, Cody. That's really
Cody.
good. That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I got to follow up Cody. That's great. Actually, I'm gonna be a gentleman. I'm gonna let Chloe go first.
All right, Chloe.
Yeah, again, a great talk, and I definitely agree with everything that you've said. I think that especially when you were talking about like the history of in the process of trying to pull people together into this artificial identity, you destroy something in that process. And one of the things I was thinking about when you're talking about the history is because I read the book History of White People, which is very interesting, of like, the person who had this idea of this aesthetic of pure white Roman statues, and the guy who thought of that, he destroyed so many statues of trying to bleach them because they weren't originally white. So he literally destroyed history in order to try to appropriate them into this conception of white history. And the same thing of like when people have this conception of this is who these people are, and they're trying to pigeonhole that into history, they end up destroying history, like how the archaeologists, in order to find the city of Troy, destroyed the city of Troy, because when he actually got to the level of where the city of Troy was, he's like, no, this can't be it. It must be grander. And so he just dug right through it and he destroyed it. And I think that's what happens. We destroy something that is more meaningful in order to build up something intangible and not useful. It's literally destructive.
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. Steve.
Yeah, so to add on to what everybody's fine points are, the thing that I think about also is really the way in which we look at moral value in aspect of history, right? So when we go back and we look at history, we have to understand that we didn't come to the same conclusions of morality and the values of those morals that we do now. They were very much different back then. Like the moral valuation has increased over time. We learn more and more about human morality. And the morals that we have now and the value that we place on them, we didn't have then. So when we look at history, we have to look at it through the lens of who is participating in those events, right? And that's something that I find really frustrating when I read different. I don't want to group people here, but when I read certain literature, it's blatantly obvious that they are attributing a certain malice to a group of individuals using the morality that we have today and using that as a measure of judgment on people in the past. And I find that very dishonest. So I'm glad to hear and see all the things that you're doing, especially the way in which you're looking at everything. I really appreciate, because that's something that I can jive with. That's something I can get behind. That's something that I can support. and that's not something that I see in other circles. So I'm really glad to see that, and I'm really looking forward to looking and participating in what you're doing. So thanks for having me, guys, as usual. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So, again, your parting words for us today.
I just guess my parting word is thank you everyone for joining the live. I just obviously want to encourage everyone. This, especially from my perspective, is not to sow seeds of division. I'm definitely not that kind of person, but I'd also see that based on the current issues happening around us, it would mean that we have to become vulnerable, and we have to become humble and patient with each other, so that we can fully make sense of it in a way that keeps moving us forward as a people, as a nation, as individuals and groups that have say a united value, basically, to just basically do better. And this is the reason why, for me, I think I have situated my perspective within an individual choice. And that individual choice is just based on the questioning that I ask myself: how do I participate in maintaining and upholding the institution of, racism? And so, for me, in my own little way, it's about identifying people as proper persons. So, thank you very much, Charles. This has been a very lovely build. I can't imagine what time it is in Nigeria back there, but
Yeah, it's
thank you so
11:05 p.m.
Oh, you need to go
and I
to
have
bed.
to be at work tomorrow morning.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you know,
And Charles, sorry, real quick, how can I contribute to the channel? How do I do that?
country. Okay, for the is it the super chat?
Yes.
Okay, there's a dollar sign at the side of the chat box.
Okay.
So you just click on it. I think it will be easy to follow from there.
Okay. All righty.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's right below on mine. So.
Oh, it's right below on yours. Just on the chat box, just look for a dollar sign there. You see it. Have you seen it?
No. No.
Where you normally type your message in the chat.
We're
Do I
using the
have
dollar sign. It's white supremacy.
do I have to be logged in? Do I have to be logged in, Charles? It just because it just shows private and comments, and then if I scroll down, it just scrolls down to the end of the comments.
Yeah, you have to be logged into YouTube in order to see it, because
Okay, I think you have to.
your bank account,
Okay,
your
I
credit
think
card
you have
information.
to. You have to.
Alrighty. Okay. Charles, we'll figure out a way to. Yeah.
Okay, no
you
problem. Thank you for
We need to get you a Patreon.
Patreon.
Like, I have money sitting around, dude.
Yeah. I'll set that up soon, shortly. I'll set that up shortly. So thank you guys for joining me in this conversation today. In fact, Ogie, your mind is beautiful, and the way you're able to articulate yourself, I'm blown away. I got that sense from the way you wrote in the Discord. I was like, this guy is smart, and you didn't disappoint. And
only on
this
Sundays.
only on Sundays. And I can say, yeah, it makes me proud to to see another Nigerian, as to see someone who basically grew up in the same city. So we've sort of had similar experiences. You grew up in Benin City. I was born in Benin City, and I spent most of my years there, primary school, secondary school, up to the university level. I only left there for work and the National Youth Service. So we had similar experiences, and it's so good to see that our training and our experiences were not wasted. We had something good while growing up. Yeah.
Thank you very
And
much.
it's great to also have this conversation. See, these are my people. I have something valuable that I share with the people here, with Cody, with Steve, with Chloe, because the most important thing that brings us here together is free and open discourse. We don't always agree on things. I mean, Steve is a lefty, and one could say I am a conservative. You understand? If I'm American, one could say I'm on the right and all that. But we have fruitful
And I'm an
conversations.
atheist.
And he's an atheist, and I'm a Christian. You understand? So there are points of differences that that could have made it impossible for us to have a conversation. Get, but we saw past that because we believe that it's better to let the other person air their views in a respectable manner. You understand? And that there is something that you can learn from the other person. Don't just assume that you know everything. You get? So it's sort of hubris for you to want to shut down a conversation because you feel the other person is wrong, or you feel the other person is morally bankrupt. That's why you don't want to listen to what they have to say. So this space, we allow everybody come and hear your points, but you're not going to get off easy. You're going to have to prove your case. So if you're saying bullshit, people are going to call you out on your bullshit respectfully, though. Yeah, respectfully. So you have to prove your point. So I hope we do this many, many more times. It was really a good time. I had a good time talking with all of you, with Chloe, with Cody, and Cody's voice is so I wish I had that voice so deep.
Thank you.
Yeah, Cody's voice is actually very cool.
Yeah. So guys, thank you very much. We'll catch you.
Thank you. I had a good time too.
Another live stream. Yeah.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cody.
Bye, Chloe. Bye, Steve. Bye, Cody.
Cody.
And bye,
Steve.
Ogie.
Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Chloe. Bye,
Nice
Steve.
meeting all
Bye.
of you.
Yeah, you too.
You too. Take care.
All right.